Good afternoon. My name is Brendan Godley and welcome to the summer sessions. Today we're going to talk about plastics. If I just quickly share my screen and I'll move on to the presentation. So, investigating impacts of plastics. And usually for a talk, I'm asking you for questions from the beginning and all the way through and at the end. I'll be joined by all of the workers that we outline in the presentation today for a live Q&A at the end of this session. And so as you come up with questions, please type them into the Facebook below this, and we'll get to them once the presentation is over. So any questions on anything to do with plastics, on marine vertebrates, or marine conservation, we're happy to answer them. So to take you all the way back to 1992, I started doing sea turtle work in northern Cyprus, and if you look around a bit in this photograph of me tagging a sea turtle, there are little bits of plastic on the beach. In the Eastern Mediterranean 20 years ago, there was a massive problem that has not stopped, but already there was a massive problem with marine plastics on the beaches. When we started that project. We acknowledged it was a problem, but it felt more of an aesthetic problem rather than a substantial problem to the sea turtles. What we were more concerned about were the impacts of incidental capture in fisheries. And so consequently, over the years, we've become more and more involved with fishermen and fisheries mitigation. And this is Dr. Robin Snape, one of our former PhD students who works out in Cyprus now, very much with the fishermen looking at bycatch issues. We were also very much worried about the loss of habitats due to mass tourism and other developments around the Mediterranean littoral, and so we did a lot of monitoring and lobbied for protected area status for some of the key nesting sites out in Cyprus. And so that's been a great success. But in the meantime, in that close to 30-year period, the plastic issue has not got any better. It's got worse in the Mediterranean and all over the world. And this here is a beach in Gabon where I recently visited to do some work on leatherback turtles. And this is just the rubbish that I was able to pick up in 5 minutes on a 50-meter stretch, and so it's clearly that the whole plastic issue is getting worse, and I think also importantly people care about this issue. We can fix it, and I believe it's become a real flagship issue for marine conservation. Never has there been so many people engaged in marine conservation, feeling that they're part of the problem but they also want to be part of the solution. And so consequently, over the last few years, with my students, I've become very much involved in the research agenda around marine plastics, especially regarding marine vertebrates, which is my area of specialization. So, any questions to me about any of that, get them in the Facebook below here. But this presentation is going to be a story of 4 people. 4 of our former students, Emily Duncan, Dr. Emily Duncan here, Dr. Sarah Nelms, who both did their PhDs with us, but Emily also did her undergraduate, Sarah did her master's, and more recently, Christian Parton and Lowena Jones, who have both recently finished their M.Res studying marine plastics. So they're going to join me at the end of this presentation to answer questions on their work and more generally. But basically, I'm going to tell you a story about their research, one after the other, and then invite you to ask them questions. I think I'm very proud of this area of work and these people. I think they've done amazing stuff. And basically, all of the papers that they've published are freely available, open line and open access. And so you can pause the video and look up any of those papers that I'm going to talk about and read them. So Dr. Emily Duncan, she's still a postdoctoral researcher here with us. She did her BSc in Conservation Biology and Ecology, and her PhD was all about looking at the impacts of plastic in marine turtles. She's now working with National Geographic and the EU on various projects carrying this research forward. So one of the first pieces of work that Emily and Sarah led on with a group of advisors was a review of plastic in marine turtles and highlighting the research gaps that there were. We realised that undoubtedly sea turtles were being impacted by plastic, but we needed to start moving forward and seeing what the true impacts were, just how widespread it was, and what were the key areas of interaction. Because turtles can be affected by ingesting plastic or being entangled by plastic, or the can impact, their beaches can be impacted. And so this is what Emily set off to do in her PhD. And the next thing she did was she did a very thorough review of the entanglement issue, along with Zara Bottrell, who's now doing her PhD at Plymouth Marine Lab, and looked at the entanglement and found that it was present in all species of marine turtles, in all ocean basins and in all life stages, and that of all the turtles encountered stranded on beaches, about 5% of them were entangled, and of those ones, 90% were dead. So clearly it's a problem in many places, especially welfare-related problems, because a lot of these animals will suffer a great deal before they die. Whether or not it impacts the populations is a different matter. There was a particular suggestion that the pelagic juvenile phase of sea turtles, when the little babies are out in the open ocean, were particularly impacted, and undoubtedly there was a clear arrow pointing to the major route of entangling materials coming from fishing gear, whether they're lost or discarded at sea. Emily got really into the guts of all the stranded turtles, especially out in Cyprus, but she's extended that around the world. And so looking at these sea turtles, doing a necropsy, going through the full gut contents and finding the man-made materials and sorting and classifying them. And so she's been classifying them by type of the kind of plastic, the sizes and the shapes and the colour. One of our papers here was on green turtles, and it highlighted that small turtles were ingesting far more plastic than larger animals, but also that there was a strong selectivity towards the types of colours and shapes that the animals, these young animals, might be looking to eat. So long, thin, green items were overly selected, things that were looking like their natural diet. Emily also got into the very small microplastics, looking at the gut content, and we collaborated with colleagues in America and Australia, and we were able to look at all 7 species of sea turtles across the 3 oceans, and we found that there were microplastic particles in every single turtle of every single species in every single ocean. Undoubtedly, these animals haven't died as a result of the ingestion of these microplastics, but if we ever needed a canary in the coal mine and a barometer of what we've done to the oceans, there we have it right there. Every single animal got plastic in its guts. And we were able to analyse, using Greenpeace's analytic laboratory, the kind of particles involved, and start to think about what the ecological pathways were for these microplastics. So, as I say, every paper that comes up, you can Google it and access it online and read the full publication. With our undergraduate students out in Cyprus, we also got involved in looking at the plastic on the beaches, where we did cores of the beaches, sieved the sand, and then classified and counted the materials. And this we also wrote up in a scientific paper. And we found that, especially out in Cyprus, we've got really, really high values. As many as 132,000 particles per cubic meter on the surface of the sand, which is higher than everywhere else that's so far been recorded except for one beach in Hong Kong. There was sand all the way down through the sand column into even as deep as Turtle's Nest, mostly hard fragments and nurdles in the Eastern Mediterranean. And we did some oceanographic current modelling and found that these particles are not likely to come from local sources, but they're likely to come from all of the Eastern Mediterranean, with currents moving them up through North Africa, all the way up the Levant, Syria, Turkey, and then dumping on the coast of Cyprus. And so highlighting very much the international nature of this issue. So that's just a little quick smorgasbord of essentially 5 years of Emily's life, but some of the great work she's done. So if you've got any questions about sea turtles and plastic, post them below and Emily will answer them. Next up is Sarah Nelms. Sarah originally did her first degree in Plymouth, but then she joined us for her master's, and then she did her PhD with us in collaboration with Plymouth Marine Lab, our very close partner at the other side of the Tamar. She's also been working on the same projects as Emily, but also been working, doing a little bit more on citizen science here in the UK and some studies related to the circular economy. So Sarah decided to take her studies into the realms of marine mammals, because as yet marine mammals and the potential impacts of them have been relatively understudied. And so to start with, she was looking just at, in collaboration with the Seal Sanctuary, we were able to look at how microplastics might be getting transferred up the food chain. And because of microplastics are out there in the ocean and out there with the zooplankton, are they being ingested by fish such as mackerel, and are they subsequently being consumed by marine mammals? And we were able to look at the fish, the wild fish that were being fed to the seals in the Seal Sanctuary, and also analyse the scat of the seals in the Seal Sanctuary, and highlight just very clearly how this trophic transfer is happening in an almost an experimental situation. To link with this scat analysis, Sarah also got involved in looking at eDNA of scats of wild animals and looking at the plastic burden of those individuals, highlighting that that we could use this as a technique where you could look at what animals have been eating by genetics of their poo, and then look at the level of plastics that they have, and see what routes things are coming up through the food chains. So this is another technique that could be used to analyse the impacts, the ecosystem impacts of plastics in the marine environment and wild animals. But unfortunately, we in the southwest of England, we're in a marine mammal stranding hotspot. That does give us access to animals that have died in the wild. We've also got very close linkages with the cetacean strandings project based in London Zoo, and linked up with Scotland and Wales, and so we were able to access marine mammals from all over the UK. And then Sarah painstakingly went through the digestive tracts, and just like Emily, went through all the gut content and digested them and analysed to find if there were microplastics therein. And you know, again, adding to this sort of lament that of 50 marine mammals of 10 species from all over the UK, there were microplastics in all animals. Relatively low numbers, undoubtedly not the reason that these animals have died, but however, setting a baseline for the future to see what changes result as our awareness of this issue, and we start to undertake policy and governance changes related to the use and abuse of plastic. Sarah's also been working very closely with the Marine Conservation Society, analysing their extremely detailed citizen science gathered data from all over the country over several decades. This was looking at the 10 years of data from all of these beach cleanups, and she was able to start getting insights into where the hotspots of marine litter are, and also start to look at the breakdown of what the items were, either by type of plastic or by route into the environment, but also looking at the increasing trend of small plastic fragments, wet wipes, polystyrene foam, balloons, and large pieces of fishing net. So highlighting altogether that that this citizen science approach gives us a great potential to study marine environmental plastic into the future. Sarah's also very much involved in engaging young people into this issue, and so she and her sister, who's a talented illustrator, produced a fantastic book which is freely available online and in many languages. If you go onto issue.com and search for Turtle and the Plastic Jellyfish, you'll be able to find that there on Issue. So any questions on plastics and marine mammals, please post them below for Sarah, and she'll get to them for you. So that's marine mammals. Now, Christian Parton did his zoology degree here with us and has done, just completed an M.By.Res, which is a research master's based on sharks, on 4 dogfish species captured in fisheries here in Cornwall. He also did a global review of entanglement in anthropogenic debris in sharks around the world. He did a literature review, but he also mined Twitter for images and reports, and was able to look at the different types of entanglement, the different species, the geographic locations, and interestingly, he was able to find that some species had only been reported as entangled in Twitter, and others in the literature showing biases there. But one of the biggest issues undoubtedly was the fact that the majority of entanglements were associated with loss of discarded fishing gear. And so highlighting that there's there are multiple dimensions of concern regarding this fishing gear that persists in the environment. Undoubtedly for sharks, the entanglement issue is probably more of an animal welfare than a true population level conservation issue, but one of concern nevertheless. And the work that he's just finished, the second part of his M.By.Res, which is just about to come out in the journal Scientific Reports, he did painstaking work, very much like the work that Sarah and Emily had completed on 4 species of dogfish captured in the southwest, looking for microplastic and looking at the types of microplastics using FTIR analysis, so analysing the individual microplastics. He was able to find microplastic across all the species at relatively low levels, but again, this sets us a new baseline of what types of plastic, what types of fibres are out there, and how they vary across different species in the ecosystem, and how they might vary as we move forward in time. So Christian, he's available also to answer any of your questions on sharks and plastics, and he's standing by. So again, post your questions below. And lastly, the last of our former students that's gone on to do this great work is Lowena Jones. She's just finished her M.By.Res. She did her degree in conservation biology and ecology, and she's been looking at microplastics in the global ocean. Now, Lowena's a fantastically keen sailor, and she's been part of a group, a number of expeditions across the world where piloting methods that could be citizen science methods to look at the abundance and the types of microplastics out in the open ocean, where running scientific research cruises is very expensive, and so that these sailing boats and expeditions could complement the data that are gathered by professional scientists, helping us to build a more full picture. And so she was part of a student expedition initially up to the Arctic that was run by a group of our dynamic students, and this is where she got involved in sampling around Svalbard. And then she got involved in another expedition that went across the Atlantic and back, and so she did lots of tows using one of these manta tows, and then gathering all this, filtering all the stuff, and then gathering it. And then she had access to data gathered by expeditions, a professional all-female expedition that continues to run all over the world. So she's been putting all of these things together. I guess the sad story with Loena's work is that every tow with these manta tows gathers plastic, but interestingly it differs between ocean basins and in different areas, and so that analysis will become part of her final master's papers. So any questions on running expeditions, the Arctic, running these sailing, all of those type of research issues, to Loena. She's standing by to answer your questions. So it wasn't just the four of those guys, although they were the main proponents. We also, the work was supervised by others, and we were backed up by lots of other technical marine mammal specialists and lab specialists. So just to highlight that science is a very collaborative issue. We do it collaboratively within institutions, but also with specialists from lots of other institutions around the world. So with that, I thank you for listening. Feel free to contact me if you have anything else, either through Twitter or email, and we look forward to answering any of your questions in the following questions and answers live. Okay, so thank you very much for your attention. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Facebook Live on marine plastics, brought to you by the University of Exeter's Centre for Ecology and Conservation. My name is Brendan Godley, and I'm very pleased to welcome you and to meet our early career researchers as well that specialise in marine plastics. Just a little bit of an overview about our department. We're based in the beautiful Penryn campus. You can see behind me, the weather's fantastic. And this is where we deliver all of the ecology and zoology and conservation degrees for the university, both at undergraduate, BSc and master's level. All through the week, we've been sharing stories about our teaching and research related to the theme of plastic pollution. And today, we're hoping to answer some more questions from you out there, wherever you are in the world, about this area. We're very proud of the way that we share our science, and we've given you examples of that today. And if you look down in the Facebook below the video, you'll see there are other links that you can follow through. Our work has covered turtles, sharks, marine mammals, and from the Arctic to tropical Africa. And so we're hoping to have more of your questions, and we'll get straight on to them as soon as I've introduced you to the panel. So in the order that I see you, first up it's Sarah. I wonder if you could introduce yourself, Sarah.
Hi everyone, my name's Sarah Nelms and I'm a postdoc working on microplastics and marine mammals.
And next up is Emily.
Hi everyone, I'm Emily. I'm a postdoc and I've done work on the impacts of plastic pollution on marine turtles.
Great. And then Loena.
Hi, I'm Loena. I've just finished my Master's Bio Research in Biological Sciences, and I studied marine plastics in the ocean.
And last up, Christian.
Hi everyone, I'm Christian Parton. I've also just finished my Masters by Research in Biological Sciences, investigating the impact of plastic pollution on sharks and rays.
Thank you. So the questions are starting to come in now. We've got a question from Amy, and it's a question which I guess it's about marine mammals, but it's pertinent to the other marine vertebrates. So Sarah, at the ready. Is there any evidence as yet of research that shows toxins such as PCBs are carried by microplastic and are affecting the fertility or the health of marine mammals?
Yeah, so we know that microplastics can carry toxins such as PCBs and other chemicals that are present within seawater. We also know that microplastics contain chemical contaminants that are kind of introduced during the production of plastic. And when those microplastics are ingested by organisms, those chemicals can leach out and enter the tissues of those animals. We don't yet know whether they're having any kind of an impact on fertility and mortality in those animals, and that's definitely something that we'd kind of like to pursue further in our research.
Thank you very much. Emily, from the turtle side of things, I know you've been involved in this side of research recently.
Yes, so like marine mammals, we know that these chemicals are present in high levels in tissues in marine turtles. But it's still very hard for us to look at a direct link between plastic ingestion and the levels of these contaminants. For example, they're very high in the turtles in the Mediterranean where we work, but we need to distinguish that between bioaccumulation in their diet and then plastic-related exposure. In terms of the plastic additive chemicals that Sarah mentioned, there is evidence that these are also in the tissues of marine turtles now, and there's one study that's found evidence of them in their eggs as well, but it's definitely an area of further research.
Thank you very much. One of the things that's peculiar or special, not peculiar, special about all four of our panelists is that they're all soon to be double graduates from the Centre for Ecology and Conservation. They've all either done their bachelor's or their master's and then subsequently research degrees. And I wondered if in turn we could just outline the career paths that we've taken. And again, well, we'll start in reverse order. We'll start with Christian.
So yeah, I did my undergraduate degree down here at the University of Exeter Penryn campus. I studied zoology, so that was a 3-year course, and felt towards the end I started to really get interested in the research aspect at the university and wanted to pursue my passions researching shark species. I've had a passion for sharks since I was really small, and so I wanted to have a look at the research avenues that the university had on offer, and one of those is the Masters by Research degree in Biological Sciences. So it was a case for me of finding two academics that wanted to pair up with me and produce some great research. So my two supervisors are Tamara Galloway and Brendan Godley, yours truly in this video, and we were able to pair our knowledge and expertise on different areas to create some really great research on sharks and ray species, both globally and locally down here in Cornwall as well.
Great advert. Thank you, Christian. And now, Luena, your careers are almost parallel. I wondered if you could outline yours.
Yeah, so similar to Christian, so I did my undergraduate degree at the University of Exeter. At the time, there was no marine biology option, so I chose conservation biology and ecology, but there was a lot of scope for the marine research in there, as well as volunteering and experiences during my undergraduate degree, such as the Marine Turtle Project at the end of my first year. But it wasn't until I'd completed my degree that I really got into plastics and plastic pollution. And in between my undergraduate and my master's, I co-led an expedition to the Arctic to research invisible pollutions. It wasn't just marine plastic, but also marine noise, and understand the invisible threats that were impacting on this environment. And it was off the back of this, generating the data from the Arctic and becoming aware and seeing the impacts, that I could generate my master's project with, again, Brendan and other supervisors at the University of Exeter, and generate an understanding of how the Arctic compared with other locations, such as the Atlantic and the Pacific, which are known to be major accumulation zones of marine plastic.
Superb. Thank you very much. What about Emily?
So I did my BSc here also in conservation biology and ecology, and throughout that every summer in between years I started volunteering at the marine turtle project in Cyprus, and I started out as a normal volunteer and learning how to monitor the beaches out there, and this led on to me doing my final year project with Brendan, actually on light pollution. And then I was really interested in how animals are impacted by us as humans and different forms of pollution. And I was also getting increasingly interested in ecotoxicology and the effects of that sort of thing. And then started working with Brendan and Tamara Galloway and partners at Plymouth Marine Lab at PML on looking at microplastics in sea turtles. And this led to my PhD, which expanded into macroplastic ingestion, entanglement, and subsequent work with partners in Australia and America on this issue as well.
Brilliant, thanks very much. And for anyone that hasn't watched the previous 20-minute webinar, I've actually outlined a lot of the amazing publications that have resulted from the work of these guys during their graduate studies. And for anyone that's just joining us and dropped in live, we're doing a live question and answer on marine plastics, and our early career researchers that are our former students that have done a lot of this amazing research on marine plastics, particularly relating to marine vertebrates. And the last person to give us a little potted history of her background is Sarah.
Thanks. Yeah, so I did my undergrad degree at Plymouth University, and I studied environmental biology. And I graduated from that way back in 2007. And then after that, I sort of went off and did various different kind of projects where I was volunteering. And one of those was a turtle project in Costa Rica. And during that time, I kind of became really aware of how much plastic pollution was on the beaches. And sort of learning about how important those beaches were for turtles. And during that time of doing field work, I kind of got really into the monitoring aspect and the research aspect. And when I got back, I decided I wanted to pursue that. And due to Exeter's kind of specialism in marine turtles, I chose to study here and did a master's in conservation and biodiversity. And during that course, I was in a seminar on plastic pollution that was delivered by Tamara Galloway, and that really piqued my interest in microplastic, and sort of what made me want to pursue a PhD in that topic. And then I applied for a PhD at PML, Plymouth Marine Lab, with Exeter, and spent 3.5 years looking at microplastics and marine litter and everything that's related to those things.
Thank you very much. So we've got some quite intriguing questions coming in. First one is from Eve, and she asks, what's the weirdest item of plastic you've found inside an animal? Would anyone like to talk about that?
I can start. I think one of the first turtles that I ever necropsied and looked for plastic in their gut content in Cyprus actually had a balloon with skull and crossbones on it, which was pretty interesting to see. I've also found toy trees and various other very strange things in them as well.
Anyone
I can
else?
kind of jump in here.
Yep.
So in terms of kind of really weird items, we didn't find that many really strange items in the sharks that we were looking at. But I suppose finding fibers from clothing, I think, is still a pretty strange item to find within a shark species. It's something that you might not expect sharks to be ingesting. And now these are fibers that you get in your clothes, and what happens is they'll be washed in your household washing machines. That water will be passed to wastewater treatment plants where some of these fibers might be retained, others might not be, and they'll end out in the oceans where they can potentially be ingested by a number of different marine species, including some of these sharks that we get right here in Cornwall.
Thank you very much. So given that you've done a lot of this, Sarah, there's a question from Tommy Horton, and he's asking, how do you find out if an animal has plastic in it?
Well, you look in their guts. So for the marine mammal study that we did, looking at microplastics in 50 different animals of 10 different species that stranded around the UK coast, I spent a very hot and smelly summer in the lab looking through the digestive tracts of all the animals that had come up and stranded on the beaches. And yeah, so basically I had to cut open their stomachs, cut open the sections of their intestines and wash it all out and filter it and look down the microscope and to see what we could find. Yeah, it was pretty smelly, and I know that Emily can sympathize with me as well on that one. But it's super interesting. Yeah.
I think I can also jump in there and say
question.
that shark intestines are also some of the worst smells I think I have ever smelt, stuck in a post-mortem room, dissecting those when they've been thawing out for a couple of days. So massive respect for both Emily and Sarah there for chopping up some other things as well. It's not a nice smell to have to be around for an extended period of time.
You do get used to it though. It does fade with time.
Yeah.
Although
there were times
I
I had a part-time job and I'd have to get back from a day of dissections, and I feel like I could still smell it on my
I was
person.
convinced it was on my clothes.
Awful. Truly awful.
Right, well, I'm having flashbacks to my post-morteming days. I think we'll stop there. It might ruin my Friday evening. Now, Lorena, you're a keen sailor, and you've now sampled pelagic plastics up in the Arctic and then all across the Atlantic and all the way back. But that was only part of your MBIRES. The other part, you were very much interested in policy and the sources and solutions to plastic. And I wonder if we had a question from another Amy, and she asks about with the COVID crisis and all this use of masks and PPE and gloves, do you think it could cause more plastic pollution?
I think absolutely. I think the unfortunate thing off the back of COVID is that everything's become a lot more disposable, whether that's simply just the masks and the gloves and the PPE that key workers and doctors are having to wear, but also the disposable items of that's unfortunately with a lot of businesses having to go to takeaway only, or they're using disposable plastic cups and cutlery rather than washing them. I think that's definitely going to be causing an impact. I know there's already a number of places where there's already masks washing up on beaches around Cornwall. I know I've seen some in hedgerows. So that's definitely going to be an impact. And with it being so lightweight, I think as soon as it's in the ocean, it's just being transported. And that's we've got one major ocean system that everything's connected. Once it's in a river, it will get to the ocean, and once in the ocean, it will be transported to other places, often far from its original source. So it's definitely of concern.
Okay, thank you very much. And then we have a question, I think it was from Owen. Yes, Owen, and Owen's clear, he's asking questions about sharks. So Owen's obviously a shark person, and he's asking, Christian, do we have a link to the Shark Trust, the charity, the Shark Trust? And if not, essentially, why not? And I do see you can comment on that.
So yes, we do have a link to the Shark Trust and the amazing people who work at the Shark Trust. So as part of my entanglement research that was published last year, in collaboration with the Shark Trust, we set up Sharon, which is the Shark and Ray Entanglement Network, which is an online citizen science platform where people around the world can submit their sightings for entangled sharks and rays, and that's clocking over away on the Shark Trust website now. You can see that alongside some of their other citizen science projects. But yeah, great to form a link between the University of Exeter and the Sharp Trust as well.
Thank you. Now we have a question from Aim Hernandez, and she says, and I know this is a question for Sarah, have there been any studies looking at plastic in marine animals' poop? And since you're a specialist and have published 2 chapters of your PhD on this subject, I wonder if you could comment.
Yes, I have looked in animal poo for microplastics. So I looked at seal scats, so poo from seals, to see kind of what levels of microplastics we could find in there. And actually, animal poo reveals quite a lot about them and their lifestyle. So it was quite interesting to have a look. The first part of my study was to look at the seal scats from captive seals in the seal sanctuary down in Greek and Cornwall. They're fed wild caught fish, and so I wanted to look at whether there were any microplastics in those fish, and then whether we would find those kind of transferring up the food chain into the seals and then kind of coming out in their poo. And we did find that even though those seals are captive and don't actually have access to kind of plastic pollution like the same levels that the animals would do in the wild, we were still finding microplastics in their poo. And then we also looked at wild seal poo for to understand kind of whether what prey they're eating links to the number of the microplastics that they might be consuming through that trophic transfer route. And we developed a method using DNA and metabarcoding to kind of understand what prey species were in the scat, and then count the microplastics that were present there. And we didn't kind of do an assessment of the numbers of microplastics. We were just developing the study and the method, which could then be rolled out further in future.
Thank you very much. Now we have a question from Ellie Rhodes Williams, and it is a question about, are there any evidences of negative effects on fertility or mortality, it's easy for me to say, from ingested microplastics. So Ellie, we're getting questions fast and furious. If you go rewind once we're finished, that question was asked at the beginning. Given that you're our policy person, Rowena, Jane has asked if you could choose one new law on the use of plastics, which one would make the biggest difference, do you think?
One new law. I suppose it would be less of a law, but more of a policy that I think there should be a plastic tax, almost similar to the sugar tax that's recently been put in place. I think for policies, there's increasing producer responsibility and consumer and social responsibility. But if there was a plastic tax, I think that would shift behaviours and make people more aware potentially of the impact and make them question their choice. And really put it down to the individual user. We're all connected to plastic, we all use it every day. And it's not that plastic is a bad item, it's useful in agriculture, medicine, engineering, it's an incredibly useful thing. But if we tax it in the right places, specifically the single-use plastic, I think that would probably have the most significant impact on lowering use.
Thank you very much. Now, this is a question which is it's probably open to all 3 of the marine vertebrate plastic people, and you can nominate yourself. But Adam's asking, which species of marine animal are most likely to ingest plastic or have plastic particles found inside their guts? Now, all of you have found plastic in every species that you've looked at, but do you think there are going to be some that we haven't studied yet that are going to be particularly prone that we should really prioritise for future study?
I could have
Sarah?
a go at answering that, yeah. So it seems that deep diving whales, such as the beaked whales and the sperm whales, have a higher kind of likelihood of ingesting plastic and then becoming impacted from it. So potentially either being compromised through their health or actually being killed by it, but we don't really know to what extent that's happening around the world. They're quite cryptic species. They're not often seen, and it's quite hard to study them. But it does seem from the literature that they are quite a heavily affected group of animals. So I'd be interested to know more about what's happening around the world with those kind of species.
Anyone else? What about the sharks, Christian?
Yeah, so the sharks that we're studying at the moment, the ones that are based around in Cornwall, are demersal shark species. So they live and feed along the bottom. Now, in regards to Emily and Sarah's research, I would say that these shark species are probably not up there on the list of most impacted from microplastics. When we're thinking about shark species that might be slightly more impacted, we're looking generally at the filter feeding shark species. So that's your basking sharks, whale sharks, and manta rays as well. So these guys will be swimming through the water, filtering large quantities of water through their gill rakers. And in the process of doing that, will probably be ingesting large quantities of microplastics. So there is some research out at the moment on that, but looking into that in further detail would definitely be prudent.
Emily?
Yeah, so in terms of species, I think it's also interesting for marine turtles and other marine species to think also about life stage. We've been looking at post-hatchlings and oceanic juveniles in our research, and they're really understudied because they're really hard to study because they're out in the middle of the open ocean. But they tend to be developing and in the places where we predict the highest accumulation of plastic to be. And if these are just eating a lot of plastic and not enough nutrients, this could cause more mortality and then issues to recruitment into populations. So we're trying to think about which life stages as well as which species of these marine vertebrates might be impacted more.
Thank you, Emily. Now, I'm starting to think that maybe this question here is for Sarah, because one of the things we haven't yet talked about is your engagement with citizen science and beach litter gathering exercises. But Lydia asks, have you done any research into the sources of plastics?
Yes, we have. So we've been working with the Marine Conservation Society to analyse their beach clean data set that is collected by citizen scientists. Initially, we analysed 10 years of that data set to look at kind of the main sources around the UK and the distribution of litter, and to look at whether there were any trends in overall litter, but certain items as well. And we found that the southwest England and the South Wales coast actually had the highest levels of litter from around the UK. And in terms of sources, the majority comes from land-based activities like public littering, which is a good thing in a way, because that means that we kind of have an idea of how we can tackle it, and it is down to the general public mainly. And once we can engage with people about kind of how their behaviour impacts the levels of litter on our beaches, then we can start kind of building towards solutions for that.
Thank you very much. Now there's one from Amy, which is a broader, Amy Bray, and she's asking, what sort of global links do we have with other universities? Emily, you've done a lot of international stuff.
Yes, so one of the amazing things about our department, I think, is our global links with so many foundations and universities around the world. I was lucky enough during my PhD to work in America with Duke University, who have a really strong connection with marine science, and also in Australia with the University of Townsville and JCU and the University of Queensland, as well as Queensland government and the government of WA in Western Australia. And that's just my work. We've got an amazing link with many international universities, and it's one of the reasons why I still continue to really enjoy working at the University of Exeter, is the opportunity to work with people around the world. So I would say yes, we have many.
Thank you very much. There's a question from Katie, and she's obviously watched the webinar and highlighting that, you know, lost or discarded fishing gear is a major source of entanglement. And she's asking, are there any schemes to reduce the amounts of gear produced and collect that that's already in the ocean. Does anybody want to add to that?
I
Emily?
can go. Yes. So me and Sarah have both been working recently with National Geographic on their Source to Sea expedition through the length of the Ganges, and looking at how people use plastic nets. And with links with Zoological Society of Conservation in London, ZSL, we've been looking at possibly whether we can start using their program of networks, which is where they create a circular economy around net use. I don't know if Sarah might have more to add on that.
Yeah, I can just kind of expand. So when we were in the Ganges, we were doing kind of riverbank surveys, collecting information on the distribution of discarded nets or lost or abandoned nets that happen to be littering the riverbank. And we've kind of been analysing those data to see what those nets are made of, and kind of assess how well they can be recycled. And of those nets that we're looking at, a high proportion of them are made of nylon 6, which is the type of polymer that that can be recycled into things like carpets, which is what Networks does really effectively in places like the Philippines. So that bodes well for a kind of potential solution there.
Yeah, I think one of the really important things as well is to start to try and provide fishers with incentives to actually collect this gear, and there's some stuff going on at the moment in regards to that. So providing them incentives to get out there and get out of the water.
Thank you very much. We've got a question here from Ed. It's kind of open, but and it doesn't have to be about marine vertebrates. It could be in the wider context of environmental degradation. But what do we think does the most harm? Is it macroplastic or microplastic? What's the greatest threat to marine life?
I can start off with that one. The thing about plastic pollution is that even when it's macro, it turns into micro. And so as larger pieces of plastic kind of break down over time and fragment into microplastics, they become more bioavailable to ingestion by a whole range of species, including the ones right at the bottom of the food chain, like zooplankton. So while these big macroplastic pieces that are floating around the ocean can do harm through ingestion, which can cause injury and also entanglement, as they break down, they can also start causing damage to the tiny organisms through the ingestion of microplastics as well. So it's kind of a whole spectrum really of potential impacts just waiting there for them to have. Great.
So Loena, from your reading around the policy and the solutions side of things, you know, the marine vertebrate people, that they can always find new questions to ask, but what do you think are the next big research questions that people need to be asking for the bigger issue of plastic pollution?
I think there's a couple of avenues of research in terms of policies and solutions. I think one thing would be engineering alternative materials. I think there's not going to be a single alternative to plastic that is going to be as durable, as effective, as cheap as plastic has been. So definitely exploring that. There is the advent of biodegradable plastics, but this too has its difficulties in that there's no true understanding of what biodegradable is yet at the moment. And these are increasingly in use, which is brilliant to see people more aware of it. But we don't yet understand the impact of these, and it could be that actually these are just becoming another pollution problem, not breaking down as they had intended to, and breaking and fragmenting into pieces of material that are just as impactful.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, one of the big questions that we got asked right at the beginning, but I thought I would save it to the end. We're just coming up towards the end, the last few minutes now. One thing I would say is that any questions we don't get to, we will answer over the weekend in the comments in the Facebook. We'll all contribute to that. But I can't remember, excuse me, it's somewhere in the chat, but we've been asked what you can do. What's the one thing you can do to reduce plastic pollution? Could I have a suggestion from all of you, something really good that will make a huge difference? Start at the top with Sarah.
I'd say cut down on your single-use plastic consumption by using kind of reusable items like a refillable drinks bottle or reusable shopping bags. Those sort of things can actually make a huge difference if everyone engages with it.
Emily?
I was going to say a similar thing, but I've had this bottle since I started my research, which is actually about 5 or 6 years ago. And we've recently been doing quite a lot of work on how plastic bottles can travel through rivers and oceans. So that's one thing you can definitely use, and just engage in learning more about the issue, and then helping other people to understand what they can do as well. And I think the more we know, the better we can help.
Okay, Lowena?
I think similar to Emily, I think definitely just having conversations around it with your friends and your family, but also getting involved with local charities and organisations such as Surfers Against Sewage here in Cornwall. They do regular beach cleans. You don't have to do an organised one, you can just go and do one yourself, but every time you go down to the beach, if you just pick up a few items of plastic, or even just on your walk around the lanes or the roads where you live, just pick up the waste and dispose of it properly.
Because the ones in the lane are going to end up in the sea unless someone picks them up. Christian?
Yeah, so as the others have said, the 3 R's really important. So that's reduce, reuse and recycle the plastic that you do have to use. And my advice would be to campaign, support the charities like the one has said, write to your local constituents and really push to try and get a reduction in the amount of plastic that we are using. So yeah, that would be my broad advice.
Right, I'm going to ask you all one last short question. I've been very proud to be on this Zoom meeting with you. You have been very impressive. You're clearly successful young people. There are much younger people on this Zoom wanting advice about how to become you. So how do I become a shark biologist or a sharing plastic sampling biologist or a turtle person or a marine mammal person? So one piece of advice to an A-level waiter on results who's going to come and do a degree with us and who wants to do the things that you do. And we'll start with Lowena because she's been stuck in the middle all the way through.
I'd just say have confidence to just go out, get involved, search opportunities. I think that's key, and just generate experience and just be passionate about what you're doing and follow that path.
Christian?
Yeah, so like Lowena said, their passion is such an important factor. If you're super passionate about something, then that's going to show through. I've been so passionate about sharks since I was really, really young. My other advice would be to read around the subject, educate yourself as much as possible. And then finally, never give up. Never let anyone tell you that you can't do something. Always keep knocking the door, keep sending the emails, and eventually something will come through for you. So yeah, that would be my advice.
Emily?
Yeah, so like the others have said, I think having sort of care and compassion for what you do is really important, and it will shine through. Another thing I would say is not to be scared to say yes to opportunities, even if they seem really scary. I said yes to an opportunity to fly to the other side of the world to look at sea turtles in plastic, and although it was scary, I've now done 4 or 5 trips out there and have a whole network of amazing people that I've worked with out in Australia. So say yes to every opportunity you get.
And Sarah?
I think one of the things that's kind of key is persistence. There are many sides to being a marine biologist that are not glamorous and smelly and dirty and really hard work, but you just kind of have to plow on through and dig deep, and just kind of know that there'll be light at the end of the tunnel and it'll be worth it. It's a really good cause. Also reach out to scientists. Like, we're quite a friendly bunch, and if you drop us an email, we'll always reply and we'll always help by sending information and advice, and just try and kind of encourage you in any way we can.
Right, well, thank you very much. That's quite uplifting for a Friday evening, or a Friday morning for you, Christian, because Christian's actually in Florida. He hasn't had his breakfast yet. So hopefully that's been a nice additional window onto the research that these guys have had. Also gives you an idea of the kind of department we are and the kind of graduates we produce. And so with that, we're going to wish you all the very best of a Friday evening and a sunny weekend and a safe weekend wherever you are. Keep asking the questions, and by Monday we'll have them answered. You can ask them even if you're watching this recorded and you couldn't actually join us. I'm just being reminded by my director that next week is about primates. So the CEC summer sessions will be led next week by Dr. Kimberly Hawkins, who's a world leader in chimpanzee and other primate research. So it's this time next week for chimps. And with that, thank you and good night. And we mustn't say anything for a minute. Let's wave goodbye.
Bye.